Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Brook Thorndycraft, for those who haven't met me. I'm hosting this conversation from Chubuktuk, which is otherwise known as Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is in Mi'kma'ki, the unceded and unsurrendered land of the Mi'kmaq, which is governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties. And welcome from whichever land you're joining from. And for those of you who aren't familiar with me, I started a company called Big Waves that specializes in making the work that we do together to create change in the world feel better as we're doing it. Our focus is really on relationships, and particularly in the areas of connection, collaboration, clarity, and conflict. We like C's around here. And one of the things that we do is this series, Ripples and Rumbles. And this series is about subversion. And the dictionary definition of subversion that I really like is to turn from below. And at Big Waves, we yearn to turn things, the things that are getting in the way of collective liberation. And we think about subversion, and we think of below as places that are hidden and unspoken and taken for granted and invisible, both inside ourselves and in our relationships. And last year, in the first Ripples and Rumbles series, we talked about subverting leadership, and it led us to want to go even deeper, more to the root of things. And we were thinking about like what's underneath the problems that we have in leadership. And one of the explorations that we're most energized by is an exploration of knowing, of not knowing, and all of the realms connected to that. And so we're looking at things like what kinds of knowing are prioritized and reproduced, what kinds are ignored or silenced, how are our efforts to transform affected by this. And the second round is a 5-part series, setting the stage first with the story of knowledge as we understand it. We did that one in July. And then considering less dominant forms of knowledge, outsiderness, edge work, disorientation, imagination, and sensual and embodied knowing. And we're going to close the series with a bit of a step back from knowing to actually look at being, because really there is more to life than what we know. And in the second conversation in Ripples and Rumbles, Subverting Knowing, we wanted to explore some of the kinds of knowing that we can access when we connect with what we're taught to keep marginal or we are taught is deviant. Before I introduce Kai-Cheng, I just want to let you know a little bit about participation. We're recording this talk and we're sharing it. And because of this, we'll be asking participants to stay muted, but you're very welcome to put questions for me or for Kai-Cheng in the chat. And we'll respond to as many as we can toward the end of the conversation. If you need any technical help with anything, you can message Joanne Kerrigan, who you should be able to find as one of the people that you can message directly. So I am very excited to have Cheng Thom here with us today to have this conversation. And Cheng is a certified somatic sex educator, a qualified mediator, a clinical hypnotherapist, and a certified professional life coach who's based in Tkaronto, Toronto. And Cheng's work focuses on the intersections of social justice, pleasure activism, and transformative approaches to healing conflict and harm. And she's the author of 6 books, including the Publishing Triangle award-winning essay collection on transformative justice called I Hope We Choose Love, which is an amazing book. The New York Times featured picture book From the Stars in the Sky to the Fish in the Sea, and the recent Canadian bestseller Falling Back in Love with Being Human. And I personally know Cheng through a range of contexts, but most notably deep democracy process work, and had the pleasure of being in a cohort with her. And we share a love for edge work and for paying attention to margins and discordant perspectives, which is why I'm so thrilled to have her here to talk about knowing from the edges. So today we're going to talk about who is invited into the dominant story and who is outside of that dominant story. And we're going to explore how the view from the edges can foster a fierce and even alchemical knowing, a different way of understanding what happens around us and within us. And the questions that we're going to be exploring are things around what can be known in the shadows when we dive deep into the places in ourselves that scare us, that we hide or that we push away or that we condemn. So, hi, Cheng. It's really lovely to have you here. How are you doing today?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's so nice to be here. Thank you also for the lovely introduction. Brooke, I think I think you're amazing in a multitude of ways. And I'm just really delighted and excited by everything you're doing and putting out in the world. And so what an honor to get to be a part of it in this way, in this space. Yeah, and I'm like good. I mean, also deeply depressed because I watched the debate for the American election last night. Perhaps some of you did as well. And I mean, I don't know. First of all, I think it's safe to say that my preferred candidate won, but I don't really prefer my preferred candidate, like it's Kamala Harris. Um, like I'm like, it's like she won by appealing to more like conservatism, which is like horrifying. And then also it doesn't really matter who like wins the debate. It's still like also America will descend into fascism regardless of what happens, at least for the immediate future. So that's my long way of saying, I think I say this to you a lot, actually, like my soul is well and the world is bad. Um, and I dance on that edge of like being well in the spirit and acknowledging like the decay of the world.
Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely. It's a hard time to keep the soul well and to figure out how to really move forward in the face of everything that's happening. So thank you for naming that. And actually, it's very relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about the realm of edges and the unacceptable, and how there's a completely different wisdom from those places than what we're taught we should know or even wonder about.
Shocking. I
And
don't want to talk about that. I'm joking. I will. That's
oh,
my
you're going
edge
to push
joke.
all my edges, aren't you?
Sorry. Yes.
Like I send you the questions. So,
And the
but I'm
topic several months in advance. Yes.
I am going to continue with that topic because I know you're
Please.
joking. And you're someone who does a lot of exploring of those kinds of places, those edge places. And so I wanted to start us off by just asking, what do you know from your own experience about the kinds of knowing that are both prioritized and reproduced? And what kinds are really ignored and silenced? And how can we learn from those places that are at the margins outside of what's expected or acceptable?
Thank you. I love this question. And I actually have two answers that are a little bit contradictory. I apologize for this in advance. But the first answer I think I'll give is one that probably a lot of people who are in the room and who will watch this asynchronously are familiar with, which is to say that the dominant culture, Eurocentric, patriarchal, colonial, white supremacist, capitalist, that dominant culture prioritizes knowledge that comes from the center of power. And the center of power tends to be coded in ways that historically have benefited the people in power, right? So white, wealthy, highly academically educated men for the most part. And then, of course, there's like a whole hierarchy of social location that follows that. So there's a heavy emphasis on the kind of knowledge that can uphold the existing status quo, the existing power center. And that tends to be knowledge also that I like to think of as like dead in nature, right? Like very much about the dissection of things, very much about being able to dissect or to classify, to render something into its inert component parts so that we can then, say that we have an analysis of it. And the analysis tends itself to pretend to be dead, right? Like it tends itself to pretend to be only quantitative and never qualitative, only scientific in a way that is stripped of bias, which of course this is never true. And I think a lot of, like I said, I think a lot of people in the circles that we share are familiar with this idea of like what kind of knowledge is prioritized and what is deprioritized, of course, is knowledge that comes from the marginal, from depth of feeling, from the spiritual, knowledge that is living and embodied, changeable, complex. Knowledge that tends to also come from like more like indigenous folks, people of color, from feminized folks, knowledge that threatens the center of power. So that's kind of my first answer. But my second answer is more archetypal than it is sociological. And that answer is like, I have this metaphor that I use a lot these days of the village and the woods. Um, and to me, the village is, kind of represented by like the human construction of houses and of like the use of fire, the use of light, to try to drive away that which is seen as mysterious, that which is seen as mysterious and therefore dangerous, corruptive, or impure. And in the woods beyond the village, we have the shadow where things are dark and mysterious and yes, also sometimes corruptive, right, and scary. And the reason that this archetypal answer is important for me is because I think that we are a lot of us in different villages. And whatever village we're in, we like to prioritize the knowledge that comes from the center, the knowledge that is least threatening to our concept of self and most simplifying to our ability to create an identity through which we move through the world, knowledge that makes us feel safe. And we tend to deprioritize knowledge that makes us feel unsafe, knowledge that disrupts or disorients the sense of self, knowledge that comes from beyond the edge, which is to say within the proverbial woods. And I think this is really important, particularly for the circles that we share, because we kind of know. There's like a sociological answer to what kind of knowledge is prioritized, which is like the white man's knowledge. But we sometimes in our like social justice or social change circles will center, oh, I don't know, the white feminists' knowledge, or like cisgender straight people of color's knowledge, or knowledge that comes from America, right? Or just the knowledge that I don't know, Cheng Thom or Adrienne Maree Brown have written in a published book, and not the knowing that comes from ourselves that like sometimes Cheng Thom is full of shit, even though she wrote a book about it, right?
Wow.
So even beloved Adrienne Maree Brown might be wrong about something sometimes, and sometimes we feel that wrongness in our bodies from our own lives or from the stories that we've inherited from our ancestors or whatever, but we fear to question because we fear to disrupt the order of the village in order to enter the woods. And so what I'm really saying is in many ways, the knowledge that we deprioritize is the knowledge that comes from our own embodied sense of where edge and mystery and emergence is.
So I'm going to come, that's, yes, the edge. So that piece that you just said there, that what we deprioritize is our own edge and mystery and magic that we can access. What is it that we lose by doing that? Or like, what is it that we can access if we were more able to tap into some of that, what we know on that edge?
What lies in the edge, right? Like, what is the wisdom of the edge? For me, the wisdom of the edge is that it's like multiple and unfolding, which is to say, the edge tells us where complexity lives, where mystery is unfolding and might never be solved, and also might never need to be solved, right? And I think this truly, in many ways, is like an anti-colonial way of knowing. We don't have to solve the mystery. We don't have to dissect something in order to understand it, because like we can't understand something only through dissecting it. The edge gives us a sense of what might be possible if we are willing to be uncomfortable or even afraid as we move toward knowing. And the knowledge that we fear is often the knowledge that we need in order to produce more wholeness of the self and wholeness in the world.
Yeah, I mean, so can you say a little bit more about that piece, that the knowledge that we really need is actually the knowledge that we're afraid of if we really want to be able to engage in more transformative, more healing ways?
Hmm. Yeah, yes, absolutely. I'm trying to think of like a gentle way to do it, but I think I'm just gonna like go with anecdote and we'll see where this goes. But like I think that this principle of the knowledge that we fear is the knowledge that we need can be found kind of in many different places, in many fractals. But some good solid examples are like um, this, I mean, you'll be familiar with this from deep democracy process work, of course, is that very often um, the knowledge that comes from the enemy is mostly false. Like, are the enemy of our vision of justice. Like, we're like, yeah, I am aware that Republicans or conservatives are probably wrong about a lot of things when it comes to social justice. At least that's what I believe. But I love this question we've kind of played with in the deep democracy circle we're in about nobody owns 100% of the truth, or nobody has a monopoly on the truth, which is to say that somewhere that white, straight, heterosexual, Republican or conservative, whomever, has a truth I don't know about. And unless I know that truth, I am not going to be able to connect with that person. And actually, I do need to connect with that person if what I'm going for is wholeness in the world. And also if I'm like a nominated leader in change making, what I need to be able to do is access the thread of truth, the grain of truth, the tiny whisper of truth in places that I don't necessarily want to go. Truths about myself as well. I remember I had I had like a Quebecois white Quebecois nationalist boyfriend several years ago when I lived in Montreal. He refused to speak English with me, even though he had perfect English and I barely spoke French, which was actually very good for me, right, in terms of linguistic and personal development. And when speaking with him, I find that Anglophone kind of university educated social justice people sometimes have this like kind of downward looking view on white Quebecois folks. It can also go the other way around, of course. And certainly there's a lot of things about like Quebec nationalist culture that I'm not a fan of. But I'll always remember this thing that my boyfriend said to me in French, of course, but I'm going to say it in English because I've lost all my French since moving to Toronto. He said, sometimes, Cheng, when you talk to me, it feels like you're trying to educate a 5-year-old. You think that I am ignorant, but I'm not. And I was like, right. Like that's a knowledge about myself, actually. Like, how am I coming across in my desire to change this person? I feel that I am entitled to change this person that I'm in an intimate relationship with so that he sees the world in the way that I do, which is different from inviting him to see the world the way that I do, right? Which is different from really connecting and letting the alchemy of our two beings coming together make the changes that naturally want to happen. In some way, my desire to change my white Quebec nationalist boyfriend of the past is a dominator impulse, right? And I need that knowledge about myself as well in order to understand, what am I really doing? What is the actual effect that I'm having a ripple effect with in the world? Does that make sense? Like, so we need the knowledge that comes from outside ourselves that is uncomfortable, and we need the knowledge about ourselves that is uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, I'm thinking about sort of, both of us have been in sort of prison justice and sort of transformative justice communities over a while. And for me, it's been a while since that was really the area where I was, but there was a lot of really deep learning for me in this sort of like the importance of recognizing the moments when we are actually criminalizing things that are in us as well, right? So it's like exactly what you're saying. There's a dominator impulse. When can I notice a dominator impulse that's happening in myself, even though I am very committed to challenging abuse of power out in the world? It's still going to show up in the way that I interact with people too. And if I'm not willing to see that, if I'm not willing to sit in that, I'm actually just going to be reproducing the exact things that I'm trying to shift. And that actually, I want to use that to kind of go into sort of a bit of a shift of topic, but still extremely relevant to this, which is, you mentioned archetype earlier, and we're both very interested in archetype and fairy tale and
It's
all these
true. We
kinds of
like
things.
magic.
It's one of the ways that we nerd out sometimes when we're having conversations. And I've been thinking a lot lately about the archetype of the monster, which is a theme that also comes up a lot in your writing, is this idea of monster, and how in so many of our formative stories, there's a stark division between the monster, which is outside and other and to be feared and avoided. And then there's the us in the center. And you talked about this in terms of the village. And the us is the victims or the heroes, right? Like there's a range of different archetypes that get used for us, but it's not the monster. And even when people try to bring the monster into the us, the monster has to almost be demonstered, like made sexy and secretly good, like, thinking about vampires and all of that kind of thing. And we all have different monsters that we're afraid of, but there's such a strong and getting stronger, like as we see polarization just increasing in the world, there's such a strong pull to be part of the center and to polarize against whatever our version of the monster might be, that it feels almost impossible to imagine how our view of things might be limited or what understandings or wisdom we might be missing. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to what you think we might know or understand if we were collectively more able to sense into some of those dark shadows that we label as monster.
Yes. Wow, I love this question so much. Um, and I just even want to hang on to this idea of like, especially I think within queer community, sometimes there is like this idea of, oh, we love monsters, we'll make the monster sexy and also secretly good. Um, the Disney movie Maleficent, the live action starring Angelina Jolie, is a good example of this. I don't know if you have seen that movie, but first of
Yes.
all, Angelina Jolie was made to play Maleficent. Even though the writing of the movie is not very good, but she is incandescent in that movie, and that movie is kind of like the origin story of the evil fairy and the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale, and the movie gives her this like very sympathetic backstory, and she's secretly good, and by the end she's completely good, and but you know, with like a little edge because she's Angelina Jolie, um, which is delightful. I think we do need that kind of story as well. But I think what you're catching, which I also am very interested in, is like there's also another version of Maleficent in the original cartoon where there's no backstory and she's just evil, right? Like she's just like, I think I'm gonna curse a baby because I wasn't invited to a party, you know? And that's also very important to pay attention to, because humans are multitudes. I mean, you know, in depth psychology, there's this idea that we all contain the infinite collection of archetypes in the collective unconscious. And for sure, those of us who have been marginalized have a deep backstory. We have pain that drives us to take the actions that we take. And also, sometimes we have impulses that cannot be justified by our backstory. And also sometimes, whether regardless of what the backstory is, we want to act out, right? We like power, we like domination. Revenge is delicious, right? And to me, it's so important to be able to bring the monster into the center without defanging the monster. First of all, because that represents more wholeness of the human being, but on a more practical level, it allows us to see ourselves for how we really are impacting the web of relationships that we carry in the world. So, a concrete example is I know many people who are prison abolitionists. They're even, um, well, yeah, punishment abolitionists and police abolitionists. And many of these people um, will, in a moment of projection, or you know, in somatics we might say under pressure, they might do like something regressive. Like they'll say, "I'm a prison abolitionist, but everyone who's an abuser should go to prison," or "I'm a prison abolitionist, but everyone who's an abuser should be killed." You know, um, and so I don't want to discount that impulse as like wrong, that we don't need to other or monster away that impulse either. What I am saying is we need to be able to hold that when we have that impulse, it is in fact incongruous with the values that we want to bring out and embody in the world.
Mhm.
It is in fact incongruous and incoherent with the narrative that we are saying, which is that we want to create a world that is free of punishment or free of carceral systems. Um, and even those of us who are, you know, putatively anti-call-out culture or anti-cancel culture, will do this too. Like we're anti-cancel culture or anti-call-out culture until we want to call out or cancel somebody because we have a good reason, right? Or because we can justify it somehow. I did this myself yesterday. I was like getting some transphobic harassment on the street yesterday, which was very unpleasant. Um, and the men who were doing it were in a car and they drove away and I took a picture of the car. And, you know, not only did it have the license plate, it also had the name of the company that I assume they were working for while they were in that car. And I thought, how wonderful and marvelous it would be to make these monsters feel as afraid of me as I felt of them. Like I had that. I was like, I felt humiliated and I would love to make them feel tiny and afraid the way I did. And I was like, it so happens I have 50,000 followers on Instagram alone. It would be very easy to make some kind of impact happen. Cheng Thom, who famously said, "I hope we choose love," and also is not into call out culture or whatever. And so I texted even a few people who are, people who I've done a lot of thinking and talking about, trying to undo call out or cancel culture with. And you know what? Quite a few of them said, "Go ahead and do it. Go ahead and do it." And again, that's not a bad thing. But unless we are able to really see, like, what is that? That is the desire for revenge. That's the shadow. That's the monster I make, right? Like, unless we do that, we're not really able to see clearly, like, is that impulse something I want to carry out in the world? Is it something I want to embody? And if not, how do I bring that monster or that shadow of me inside myself so that I can create a new range of choices, a range of choices that is not about, I just need to avoid being the monster or I'm going to be the monster. But there is something else that is possible when we bring monster and villager together.
Yeah, and I mean, I can feel an edge here, right? Because in this, like, and I'm sure there's lots of people who are listening to this or watching this who can feel an edge here, right? Because there's so much real harm happening that, of course, on on an embodied level, on a cognitive level, on every level, it makes so much sense that your initial
Absolutely.
impulse would have been to scare them, to lash out as a way to feel powerful, as a way to get back, as a way to protect yourself, and I think that's that makes so much sense. And actually, I
It's
mean,
deeply real.
it's
Yeah.
so real, it's so important. And so I guess, the edge that I'm feeling here is around how to hold both of those things with so much care and compassion in in ourselves, right? So that it's like, oh yeah, I can notice the moments when there's something where I actually want to be the hero and I want to punish, or I want to be or and I can feel the moments when there's a piece of monster that's coming up in me, because I absolutely harm people. Like, none of us is actually free of that. And how do we actually let both of those things be present with as much care and compassion for ourselves in that as possible? I don't know if you want to.
Absolutely. I think that it's like there's so much edge here because I think we are trapped in the binary of like one is right and one is wrong, right? Like it would be right to punish these people or just to ask for accountability. Like it's not necessarily punishing to be like, hey, you can't harass people from your work truck in the middle of the street. Like is that punishment? Unclear. Um, so that's not necessarily the wrong choice. Also, it also makes so much sense to like be like I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to educate. I don't want the trouble of that. Or also I choose not to do that. And for me, we there are many ways, as you know, that we can kind of get into this binary of like, is there a right choice and a wrong choice? And we can go deep into the wisdom of every possible choice. There is a real resounding human wisdom inside the desire to punish, the desire to avoid, the desire to redeem, the desire to reconnect, with these people who are doing kind of harmful things. All of those pieces have a wisdom in them. And for me, one way, like a fast, kind of like a helpful framework is am I doing what I'm doing out of the compulsion to be a certain way?
Mhm.
Or am I acting from real choice based on what I care about? And what I care about in my body can be different from what someone else cares about. Like, one of my boyfriends was like, catching, good job on choosing love. But also, you could just call this company and be like, hey, there was some unprofessional behavior. Could we have a discussion? Also, an excellent choice. My boyfriend cares about me. He cares about responsibility. He cares about conversation. And he can make that choice. I care about sending a message. I care about feeling power in a different way. Actually, personally, don't care about those men in the truck so much. Um, and so, for me, it's really about like when we when we integrate, when we de-evilize, right? Like when we pull all the possibilities in and find the wisdom in each of them, it sometimes opens this feeling of, oh, I have to act in a certain way because that's the right thing. It's about choice. What do
Mhm.
you really care about? And how do you move toward that in your own body based on choice and not compulsion?
Oof, you said it's about choice a few times, and it just was like, yes, that's exactly it. It's about expanding the possibilities of what we could do, as opposed to being pulled or feeling compelled by this divide of monster and us. I love that.
Right.
Thank you. So I mean, you brought in a very personal example, and thank you for sharing that. And I want to also sort of expand this into something that, both of us do a lot of work in the sphere of group dynamics and relationships in the workplace and in community. And I think you will probably agree. I know you will agree that the tendency to shut out any knowing of whatever is considered marginal or edgy is alive and well in a lot of the groups that we work with. And that's from, very sort of like mainstream, organizations, workplaces, all the way to sort of more collective grassroots organizing. And could you speak about how you see this showing up, and what you like, maybe even with something tangible about what you've seen becomes possible when groups are able to get to know their edges?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had some kind of nerd outs about this too, right? Like the field of organizational and group consulting has become quite difficult. Maybe it was always difficult, but like right now it is very hard. And some of you in the audience, I see, are like smiling and laughing because I think this is true. There were some articles put out about it recently. As a systemic phenomenon, that polarization is increasing in the collective, as in the world collective, and I think that's very true, especially in change movement kind of work. Um, and I think there is some, sort of clear reasons for that. Like, it's about deprivation. It's about impending catastrophe, like more and more and more pressure externally in the form of violence, like horrific, genocidal, awful violence, like what is happening in Gaza right now, like what is happening in Congo, like what is happening in Sudan, right? Like all of these very intense external pressures. Are being placed on us to figure out our shit and to decide who we are. And in that moment of like experiencing intense pressure, what I see in group dynamics is like a very swift move toward trying to find like a right and wrong.
Mhm.
But this is the right way to do organizing, and that's the wrong way. This is the right way to move toward justice, and that's the wrong way. And there's actually wisdom in that impulse too. Like we do need like decisive action, and we do need clarity a lot of the time. But where the wisdom of the impulse to like deciding on right and wrong kind of fails us, I think, is where it quickly becomes like a toxic us versus them, right? And I think one of the failings or the problems of contemporary social justice thinking in the global north is that like this like tendency to splinter based on identity, with the idea that because we have an identity of a certain kind, it means we always have access to the truth, which
Mhm.
is like kind of real. Like, like I'm a transsexual and nobody's not a transsexual will know what that feels like. But I cannot speak for all transsexuals. I can't speak for all Asian people, but the desire to weaponize identity in order to create a sense of rightness and wrongness happens very fast and grows really quickly. So all of this is to say, uh, we very quickly push away people inside of our movements, inside of groups that we want to belong to, by saying you could never understand me, and I don't understand you, and I am right, and you are wrong. And there is something very complex. I mean, it's probably maybe not that complex anymore to think about inside a social justice movement, where we will say, if I am marginalized, then I am right, which makes me the center of truth, and it makes the privileged person wrong and bad.
Mhm.
Right? They have to defer to me. And this actually, this is edgy to say, I think it has some wisdom in it as well, but also is a dominator impulse.
Mhm.
Very often it is a dominator impulse. And I see this a lot playing out in its most egregious forms of domination when, for example, I have worked with groups who are like run by, say, middle class people of various backgrounds, queer, racialized, who are trying to work in solidarity with, say, like folks who are more marginalized, living on the street economically, right? Or like extremely kind of culturally marginalized migrants who don't have access to social justice language as much. And there can be kind of this weaponization of, well, if this migrant person or this homeless person is not using the correct social justice language, then they're harming me and I am a victim, and therefore you need to do what I say, right? And this is a very edgy thing, but I think we need to be able to reckon with it because, again, if we are not able to see that inside ourselves, we're not able to see what we're doing is we are recreating dynamics of oppression with a slightly different shape, but not even a very different shape, right? So we need to be able to hold that. What becomes possible when we meet the edge is solidarity. Solidarity becomes possible when we meet the edge. Like right now, there is this whole controversy, this whole culture war between, I guess, TERFs, like trans exclusionary radical feminists, and trans folks and allies. Sure, there's lots of reasons for that. I personally find trans exclusionary radical feminism toxic and painful, you know. However, as we said, there might be a whisper of truth somewhere in there, and one whisper of truth I can definitely feel in, trans exclusionary radical feminism or the gender critical movement is that women do not feel safe. I also do not feel safe as a woman, right? But we're splintered against each other, saying, "I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. You need to listen to me because I'm more marginalized." And this is just a very good, clear example of like how both sides are like, "I'm more marginalized than you." And again, I personally believe that trans women are more marginalized than cisgender women, but people could argue with me about that. But what happens is we lose the ability to do solidarity if we cannot meet the edge. And I think there's a fear that if we meet the edge, we will have to give up what's really important to us. Like that I might, for example, as a trans woman, might need to give up my dignity in order to meet the edge and connect with like a gender critical person. And certainly that could happen. It's a real risk. That's why we fear it, because the risk is real. And if we can find a way to meet that edge, right, without losing dignity, without dehumanizing, then real solidarity becomes possible. And we get to look at this problem, which is that it is actually capitalism and patriarchy that are making us so unsafe. And we would have much more power to confront that together if we were not busy with the business of competing for domination over the bottom.
Yeah, I want to just pause there because, as you were talking about that, I could feel, I sort of had all of these kind of feelings and reactions in myself. And it's like, on the one hand, and I very much agree with you in what you're saying around the importance of solidarity. And then there's also this piece that comes up for me a lot. And that, I mean, around how unequal it is in terms of who has the capacity, in terms of time, in terms of energy, in terms of privilege, in terms of all of these things, to be reaching out, to be building solidarity. And so I actually, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about where the line is there, or maybe my question is more, and actually before I ask this question, I'm also going to say, if people have questions, put it in the chat, like think of them now and put it in the chat and we'll come to them soon. But where is the line around, it's not quite the right question. Let me reframe this. What do you feel, why does it feel important to you for people who are experiencing some sort of marginalization, some sort of outsiderness in that way, to put in that effort?
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the big ones, right? And I think this is a question I spent like 5 years and probably will spend more trying to answer. Because I think a foundational kind of contemporary social justice wisdom is if we are marginalized, We are already undergoing trauma, probably, and deprivation, and already like navigating so many systems in order just to live. Like, isn't it unfair? Doesn't it perpetuate injustice to ask us to exert yet more labor
That's
for the
exactly, yeah.
transformation of others?
Yeah.
And yeah, it does. It is, in fact, unfair. It really is unfair. And I think at a base level for me, like choosing love for oneself, like embracing complexity, it starts with the self. Like I really think it's about in order to embrace the complexity of others, we need to embrace the complexity of the self, which is to say that sometimes I'm just not going to do it.
Mhm.
I am not always going to be a perfect angel and like turn to the men in the truck and be like, hello, excuse me, I am a person. Would you please not scream epithets at me from your truck? So like, no. So like, I'm not going to do therapy for the person who's harassing me if in a group from a truck, right? That's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's absurd. And so I'm not going to do it. And also, I don't think it would be like it would be really understandable if I was like, yeah, I did take a picture of that truck and posted it on the internet and asked people to, do whatever. There is so much wisdom in just like it's exhausting. It's exhausting. We don't always have to do it. And certainly we're not going to do, even if we choose to, even if that's what we care about, extending ourselves in that way, we're going to fail at it because it's really, really freaking hard. And it's deeply unfair. And why is it important anyway? Well, I think first of all, if we make it a choice and not a compulsion,
Mhm.
then we get to opt in and out in the moments that we do feel capacity. And sometimes it's just more important to preserve our life than it is to like try to connect with a person who's trying to harm us, right?
Yeah.
But, I think a lot about what Bell Hooks writes in All About Love. Um, for her, the definition of love is that love is not a feeling, it is an action, a verb, a practice. And she writes, and this comes to her, I think, by way of the psychiatrist Scott M. Peck, that the definition of love is the willingness to extend one's own self for our own spiritual growth or the spiritual growth of another.
Mhm.
So if I'm going to paraphrase that, it's like love is growing, choosing to extend beyond what is comfortable, easy, what choosing to make ourselves uncomfortable for the sake of spiritual growth. And that might be someone else's spiritual growth, but also it might be for our own spiritual growth, right? And so again, if we make love a choice and not a compulsion, if we don't like kind of look down on people and be like, you should be advocating, you're supposed to be better. If we say, sometimes we could choose love, right? If you wanted to, if you cared about that, what becomes possible when we choose that, when we're able to, then I think it's really about, first of all, if we have the capacity, if it is safe enough, then we have to create the interpersonal possibility of solidarity. But also, it is important, I believe, because doing that, finding the way to meet the edge in another person is spiritual growth for the self. It is
Mhm.
a reclamation of dignity and humanity that is noted in many like non-colonial or pre-colonial spiritual traditions around the world, that we do actually have the capacity to do what is hard for us for the sake of becoming more, the sake of becoming more enlightened, the sake of becoming of developing more capacity. It is for the sake of knowing that hatred and violence cannot strip me of the capacity to restore my own dignity and to choose love, that I can do that. And again, it really is about restoring the choice and not making it coercion. So
Mhm.
when I can choose to love the turf, right? When I'm not coerced to love the turf, that's love, right? That's real love. That's real transformation. That's the distinction.
Yeah. Yeah, and you brought in spiritual growth and you brought in knowing, and I think, coming back to sort of the theme specifically that we're talking about today around like what is it that we can know from exploring the edges. This is exactly what you're talking about, actually, right? We know more about ourselves, we know more about what it is to be alive, what it is to be in our own choice, in our own capacity. And so,
Sorry,
yeah,
just remembered something very important. Can I
yes,
interrupt you?
of course.
Right. Right. There is also another really important reason to develop the self in this way, which is beyond like personal spiritual growth, which is very important, which is that when we do that personal growth, it gives us the ability to more accurately perceive our own power,
Hmm.
so that when we are doing revolution, we don't
Hmm.
reenact systems of domination on other people and justify it with our pain.
Yes.
That's
Thank
the
you.
important systemic reason.
Yeah.
It is really like practicing extending toward the oppressor when we can, when it's a choice, gives us the ability to um, not enact oppression on people who have less power than us. It allows us to more accurately see who has less power than us. And I mean, there are many examples throughout history. I think Gaza is probably one of the most hot contemporary examples where when we are able to extend ourselves, then we're able to notice if suddenly things have changed and we are in the position of power, and we don't have to use, we should not use our own trauma to justify violence or genocide. And on a much smaller scale, that's true about raising children as well, right? So when we are dominated by our parents, we develop certain tendencies that actually help us to survive, have a wisdom in the world, but may not actually be the same tendencies that we need to raise children. When working with families, I saw this a lot, where parents who'd experienced horrible things had to struggle because it felt like their children, who were triggering them all the time. I assume that having children is triggering as fuck. Um, it felt like those children had the power because the children had the power to trigger them. But in actual fact, it's always the parents who have the power, right? Um, an extension toward love, practicing spiritual expansion, is what gives us that capacity to know the difference between reenacting domination and really moving toward justice.
Thank you. So I'm aware that we're moving toward time to wrap up, and I want to really sort of leave people with something that's really tangible to be able to take away from this. And before I do that, I'll just remind if anyone has a question, just post it to me in the chat, or you're very welcome to join in. We'd love to hear what people are wondering about in this conversation. But as I'm waiting to see if anyone has something that they want to ask, is there any sort of practice that, this is hard, this is edge work, this is about getting to know what is inside of us that we push away, that we don't feel comfortable with, that we, judge in ourselves, and judge so much in ourselves that we can't even recognize it in ourselves, and deeply judge it in other people. And so I'm wondering if you have any sort of practice that you could share that would support people to kind of gently touch into, if they're interested in taking that step, to gently touch into the knowing from their own experiences of their edges in these ways.
Yeah, I love that. So this is very much inspired by like a Vajrayana Buddhist practice, right? Of I think in the global North Anglosphere, we often call this like the feeding the demons practice. I've sort of like adapt it for social change, So this is actually kind of paradoxical to what we've been talking about before, but really, my invitation for anyone in social justice movement who is interested in edge work, choosing love, transformative justice, is to examine the part of ourself that leans in the other direction with a lot of compassion, like the part of us that actually does want revenge, even if we are, decades long prison abolitionists. Look for the part of ourselves that actually is like, I do think consequences matter. I do think whatever it is that we think we're not supposed to be when it comes to choosing love or or transforming toward a more liberatory world, just a gentle invitation to like be curious about the parts of us that sometimes feel empowered by dominating others, feel empowered, feel the deliciousness of um, like that movement toward commanding, directing, forcing, coercing, um, the part of us that is deeply sympathizes with, um, yeah, like a kind of like a more like compulsive urge, whatever that is, actually loving that. Like, what is the wisdom in wanting to do a call out about somebody? What is the wisdom in wanting to punish people? What is the wisdom in like wanting to be, I don't know, emperor of the revolutionary universe, right? Like, whatever it is, look for the wisdom in that without having to be it.
Mm-hmm.
We can really love those parts of ourselves without having to become them. We can love any part of ourselves without having to become that part. And when we can choose that, that is where compulsion starts to fade, starts to open. So the practice is really like find something in yourself that you fear to be and look for the wisdom and try to love that wisdom inside of it without falling into the trap of I have to become that part just because there's some truth there. There is something else when I'm able to love all the parts at the same time.
Do you have any, I mean, this is like probably a way bigger question than is possible to respond to in just a small amount of time, but do you have any um, suggestions about how someone might know that they are showing compassion and getting to know a part of themselves without being pulled into it?
Yeah.
How do you tell the difference?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, Well, I think on the first one is we stop feeling like nausea and terror and headaches and like like the body symptoms of um, starting to invite in awareness of like an exiled or unwanted part of the self. We start to lose that kind of intense repulsed quality. So that, that is one very key sign is we start to develop more ease
Mm-hmm.
within inviting that part in. And the other is that we're able to hold contradiction without shutting down. So we're able to say, like for me, I've done a lot of work, for example, like it is like delicious to have revenge. Like I wrote a whole book about like a novel about revenge, and I'm able to be like, wow, that's like fun and delightful. And I probably write more books about revenge actually. Um, and also I'm able to hold like this, like probably not going to do that or going to try not to do that in real life. I also might do it occasionally, like probably more by accident than intentional, but um we are able to be like, yeah, like I could really allow my imagination and my emotions to extend in one direction and also flexibly extend in another direction. And it doesn't create that sense of, oh, I'm shutting down. It doesn't create the sense of I have to stop thinking about this. It doesn't create the sense of I'm a bad person. We start to, right. I guess like the very simple sign is we feel less shame.
Yeah.
We feel less shame.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a little bit like in somatic practice when someone has had a really hard time experiencing anger and then anger starts coming up. And it's often something that people feel quite ashamed about if it's something that's been suppressed for a long time. But I love it when someone starts feeling anger. It's
It's amazing.
awesome. It's
It's
amazing.
so
It's like
amazing.
it's such a powerful moment, right? To actually be able to really feel that. And it doesn't mean that you have to feel it outside of the practice, right? Like if it's too much or if it's not something you want or but yeah, I'm appreciating what you're saying. Thank you for that. So there's a couple things in the chat. And also I see that Pauline has raised her hand and I'm gonna go for that and then I'll read the comment in the chat. Go for it, Pauline.
Thank you, both of you, so much for this beautiful conversation. I was just wondering, like, on a practical note, I feel like there can be this subtle difference when like, I think I'm extending love, but I'm not sure if I'm falling into a dominator impulse because I'm maybe subconsciously trying to change that person to like see things the way I see them. So I'm wondering if there's like some tips about like how can you tell um, when you're sort of in one or the other, you know?
Oh, totally. Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, it's just important to normalize we're allowed to want people to change their minds and to ask them to change their minds. especially if it's about something very important, like persuasion and invitation are all okay. We don't just have to be like, you're allowed to want to kill all these people and I have to love you. Like, that's really not and I know that's not what you're saying either. But it is actually just totally okay to invite someone to change their mind. And I actually think one of the signs that we are doing that in a kind of extension of love kind of ways is that we can be really clear and honest about it. Like, often there's like a feeling of like, oh, I can't like quite say this, and I have to like kind of manipulate somebody into like being the way I want them to be. I don't know if that's what you're saying, Pauline, but I just know that in myself. And so actually a very good practice is getting clear on ourselves. Like, what do I want the other person to think about and change? And then practicing just saying that to their face. Like, hey, like, I'm invested in you as proven by the fact that I'm here caring about you, having this conversation face to face. I would love it if you could think about this other thing, because I hope that you change your mind about whatever we're talking about. And the clarity of that, I think, and the integrity of that request, I think actually allows a lot of love to happen in that space. So that's one thing. I think the other, like a more subtle sign, is that we are able to imagine like detaching, like actually closing or letting go of relationship if the person cannot or like will not, chooses not to change in a way, like especially if it's something really fundamental, like if it really is like they have a worldview or even like a practice in their lives that is harmful, goes against our ethics, and we're asking them, can you change, can you change, can you change? And eventually there's a point in some relationships where it just becomes clear, or they just say to us, no, I'm not gonna change, I can't do that. Then actually the move is sometimes we have to let go. And that can be such a scary feeling if it is like someone who is really important to us, right? But we have to be able to entertain that like idea of like, oh, like, can I let go? And in some cases we cannot. Like, my parents, for example, have really different politics from me, and I'm not going to cut them out of my life. But it does mean that I have to let go of something in order to keep the relationship going. And maybe it just means that I'm able to envision like containing that relationship for the sake of, being in a loving relationship with my parents, which is often very difficult. So that's a complex answer, but really what it is about is like, it's about developing the ability to maintain connection and make clear requests while also having clear boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I'm just going to read a comment that was left in the chat, and then we'll have to move to closing up for today. This conversation,
No,
I feel
let's
like
continue
could go on
forever.
for so long. I know. We will have more, but I want to respect people's time. So this isn't a question. This is from Priya in the chat. This isn't a question, but it's a statement that being a single parent is a life sentence. And then in parentheses, my joy-filled choice. In what I'm now learning is edge work. I have language now to distinguish my choices and what my compulsions are, because I live at edges. Mine, my kids, our contexts. I didn't know I was doing this work. I'm inspired to ask myself new questions as I walk along these edges. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Priya.
So beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I am not a parent, but just whenever I witness a parent, I'm like, wow, that is like the deep edge work. Like, it's just such respect for the extreme edge work that is being a parent, especially a parent who is conscious about wanting to make choices that don't reenact any kind of oppression or trauma in the world. So thank you.
So thank you so much, Kai-Cheng. It is, as always, such a pleasure to converse with you. And I think Joanne is about to drop a link to your website in the chat. Do you want to share anything about what's coming up for you next, or how people can connect more with your brilliance?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me and entertaining my like edgy jokes and like edgy anecdote, edgy everything. I really appreciate this invitation. And I'm really inspired and excited by the fact that we can have these conversations, between you and me, and also kind of in a larger space. If folks are interested, in what we're talking about and would like to work together more on this, I actually am hosting a course with Education for Racial Equity, which is a fabulous platform, that has hosted other folks, working in the social justice space. So I'm going to put a link to that in the chat. And if folks want to join us for 4 online days with a cohort, a medium-sized cohort, no bigger than 60 folks, we're probably going to have between 45 and 60. We're going to be exploring gently together, like really what do we very much care about, and how does what we care about allow us to explore edge and shadow, and how will that give us the capacity, or how can that transform the movement work we do? So if anything that we spoke about here resonates with you and you want to do more, I would love to see you in this course with Education for Racial Equity. We're calling it Revolutionary Love and Radical Praxis, the Loving Justice Lab, because it's all an experiment, experimenting with, not experimenting on. And yeah, otherwise, I would just love to remain in connection in this web with you all. Thank you so much.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Kai-Cheng. And for anyone who's interested in joining us for the next session of Ripples and Rumbles, Subverting Knowing, I'm going to be interviewing a mentor of mine, Sage Hayes, on November 13th at 4:30 Atlantic, 3:30 Eastern, on the topic of sensing liberation in the body. If you're interested, the link to register is being dropped in the chat right now. I hope you'll join us. And when you register, you'll also get a look at our new ebook on emotional agility as well, which we're pretty excited about, not just because of the fun graphics like the one that I will just briefly share with you, because we're feeling very excited about the funness of this
So
topic.
great.
Thank you. Yeah, you can also sign up for our mailing list at the link in the chat to make sure you find out about any upcoming offerings. And again, Kai-Cheng, honestly, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, and thank you to everyone for joining us and for the questions and comments. And I am wishing you all a beautiful continuation of your day, and hope that you're able to take something really powerful away from this.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Brooke. Thanks, Joanne. Lots of love.